Hey there, it's Lenny McGill with the GlockStore Performance and Custom Shop here in the Nashville studios today, and we're going to talk about taking your gun apart, your Glock, taking it apart and making it easier to take apart. You know, one of the things that everybody likes to do is to take the gun apart so they can clean it and kind of play with it and look at it and get to know all the parts and pieces. This is a Glock 19 Gen 5. I'm going to drop the magazine. I'm going to double check inside to make sure it is unloaded. And it is, and I'm going to pull the trigger in a safe direction. Now I've got an unloaded gun. There's no ammunition in this room. I can't accidentally load this. There's no loaded magazine, so I suggest you do the same thing whenever you're working on guns, cleaning your guns. Keep the magazines and the ammunition, far away. Okay, you'll have no problem with that for sure. So we're going to talk about the takedown lever. One of the big complaints for Glock owners is that it's difficult to manage the takedown, which is also known as the slide lock. Not to be confused with the slide stop. Okay, slide stop is the slide release that you use to lock the slide back and to access it with your thumb to let the slide go forward. You release the slide. That's the slide release, also properly known as the slide stop. The slide stop is different from the slide lock. And you'll find that people in the business interchange those often because slide stop, slide lock, slide stop. It gets to be kind of monotonous. But the slide lock is also known as the takedown lever. That's a way to think about it because it enables you to take down the gun. The problem with the factory slide lock, well, there's really two problems. One, it's small, and so a lot of people don't like the ability or don't have the ability to actually get a good purchase on that to actually pull down. Because in order to take the gun apart, we need to disengage this slide just a little bit, about 1/4 of an inch, and then pull down on the slide lock, which is spring loaded. And the way this factory one is set up, it's sometimes difficult to get a good grip on there, especially if your hands are cold or you have, certainly have gloves on. You're not going to be able to do it. And a lot of people say, hey, it messes up my nails. Well, it doesn't bother me because I don't really have nails. But if you're a female, it does mess up your nails. So we have developed an extended precision slide lock. And the word precision is very important because we're going to take this one apart. We're going to show you what the factory one looks like compared to the one that we machine here in the USA. The factory one is stamped because they do them fast, okay? So they stamp them out. And because of that, it has a little curve to it. I'll show you that. The ones we manufacture are machined. They're a little bit longer, wider, so they can actually, get a grip on it. And they're also a little bit thicker, and they're flat, okay? They're not curved. Now, what does that mean, okay? Why does that make a difference? Because the barrel locks up on the slide lock, okay, every time, boom. If that is curved, the barrel's going to lock up in a different spot every time. I mean, seriously, it's kind of microscopic when you think about it, but you don't know where that, everything's vibrating, right? And when you shoot, you should see some slow motion photography of these guns. That slide stop or slide lock is bouncing up and down. Everything's kind of boom, 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 boom. When the barrel locks up, when it finally comes back to boom, every time that it locks up, the barrel lugs are in a little different spot. So that means the barrel position is just a little different. Not a lot, but a little. And that makes a big difference when you're, shooting at long distances. Right? And if anybody shooting, long-range rifle understands the concept of everything has to be the same because you want consistency, because consistency is accuracy. So our precision extended slide lock will give you better accuracy than the factory. And it also makes it a lot easier to take down. So let's go through the process of getting to this because it's a little different than the Gen 3. Now the Gen 3 uses a leaf spring. I've done videos on that before. If you can take a peek over here, this is a Gen 3 slide lock. These are Gen 5. There is a difference. If you look at the notch on the Gen 5 is not a 90-degree angle. It has a curve like that because it uses a coil spring. And when you put this in and out, you actually fight over top of that spring. So if you had a square angle, it would just take the spring with it and rip the spring out. You'll see when I go ahead and go through the disassembly procedure. So they did redesign the Gen 5 slide lock from the Gen 3, 4 slide locks. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and make sure this gun is unloaded, pull the trigger in a safe direction, wrap my hand up over the top, and I'm going to pull back on the slide just about 1/4 of an inch. What I'm doing is I'm actually taking the barrel pressure off of the slide lock. I'm going to pull down on both sides and hold down on both sides. Something's kind of hard to get hold of sometimes, and walk the slide off. Okay, now let's look at the slide lock before we take it out, because we got to take this gun apart and we have to get into this slide lock, which is right here. Okay, you can see it's spring loaded, and before I even get in there, I can kind of see it. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but right in here, there's a spring underneath it. It's a coil spring. And so let's see here. Here's the piece right here. And if I get up here, there you go. There's that spring right there. You can see a little silver spot right there. That's the spring we're talking about. That is different from the Gen 3 and Gen 4, which uses a leaf spring, which is kind of basically a small sliver of steel that kind of springs up and down. To get to that, we've got to go ahead and disassemble this gun. And to do that, we're going to use our punch set, which is right over there. So let me go ahead and grab that punch set real quick. Boom. And so now here's how we do all this. Because the locking block is in the way of that, I've got to take the trigger pin out. And then once I take the trigger pin out, I've got to go ahead and take the trigger out, so I'll pull the whole thing apart. So it's a really pretty quick disassembly situation here. You do need a punch set of some sort. The punch set is recommended as the 3/32 inch for Glock, okay? I use a little thicker punch on the trigger pin because it's a little bigger pin. The trigger housing pin is the 3/32. To get that trigger pin out, we're going to start from the left side. And the key to this is to manipulate the slide stop, not the slide lock, but the slide stop, because it captures that pin. So to be able to do that, I want to just wiggle a little bit as I access the punch. So here's my punch, here's the pin, put the punch right on top, and sometimes they come out easy, sometimes not. And this one was easy enough, okay? So you see, it's not really hand pressure as much as body pressure, right? So once I get on top of it, there's the trigger pin. I'll pull it out by hand and just drop it into my little donut here. And then I'm going to go ahead and use a smaller punch for the back side, which is the trigger housing pin. And this I can do by hand because it's a plastic little pin. And once the two pins are out, I can go ahead now and take my punch and I'm going to pull the locking block out, which is right here. And you got to use a punch or something to pry this up. And the locking block just sits like that. Again, it goes into my donut, don't want to lose it. All right, slide stop will come out like so. Just put that down. And I can, I could access the slide lock right now. But I'll just pull the trigger out because I'm here. Trigger mechanism comes out as a whole piece. So now we basically have a frame with the magazine release button and the magazine release button spring, mag catch spring, as well as the slide lock and the slide lock spring, okay? So the slide lock spring, if you can see in here now, is right there. Let's see if I can get my punch in here, right there. And it is a little silver coil spring. So people sometimes kind of go, well, how do you get that out? Well, you have to take the slide lock out. And to take the slide lock out, we have to depress it and kind of force it across that spring. Remember that the notch is angled. So like I said, we're forcing it across that spring. A lot of people get confused by that. They think, well, gee, am I going to break something? Am I going to break the spring? And no, the reason that notch is angled on the slide lock, this angle right here, is so that you can drag it over top of that spring, that coil spring, which sits inside there, without grabbing that spring and tearing it out or bending it or, disfiguring it so it won't work. So to do so, and this is where it gets a little tricky. You need a punch. which is your 3/32 inch punch. You want to push down, and you want to start pushing out it over, and it just came out that quick. Now, you see that I kept my finger here to capture that spring just in case I came through all the way and the spring goes flying away, and then, you know, I'm out of luck until I call GlockStore, go to the website, and order a Gen 5 Slide Lock spring, which is on our website. And we sell a ton of them because people do lose them. So I captured it with my thumb, and I'm just going to now pull out the whole slide lock. Boom. There's the factory. And I didn't let that spring jump out. And there's the spring right there. I might as well just pull it out so you can look at it. There's the factory slide lock. And here's the spring. And there's the spring. There's the two pieces we're talking about. Slide lock spring, slide lock itself. We're going to install our precision slide lock, which is slightly larger. See if I can show you the difference here. I mean, it's slightly larger. Let's I'll tell you what, I'll put it around the backside and see if you can see that it's just a little bit bigger. Not too big to interfere with holsters, but big enough that it will make it a lot easier to take apart. And it's bigger, and it's by design, it's bigger on both sides, so that allows you to get a little better grip. It's got a little better texture. The other thing about these guys is, like I said, they're bent. You can see all the motion. So I can actually have this thing, see how this is not a flat piece. Whereas ours is flat on both sides. It's not going anywhere. This thing kind of lifts up. So that's the precision we're talking about. They're machined here in the United States. They're available in different colors. It's a little bit thicker overall in material width as well, by design. Kind of fills that gap up a little bit, and it makes it a little bit more tight. Makes the gun a little tighter. It's not quite as loose. The barrel's not flying around all over the place. Now, I'm exaggerating, right? Okay, because the barrel's not, you know, moving by inches. It's moving by thousandths of an inch. But that thousandths of an inch makes a big difference when you're shooting 25, 30, 40, 50 yards. So I'm going to install the gold one because it'll be easy to see. First, I've got to put that spring back in, right? Now, if you lose this spring, we have them. People call up oftentimes and say, you know, I lost a spring, what can I do? And I say, well, we can send you a spring. And we have them. Like I said, it's a Gen 5 slide lock spring. It's a little coil spring. It's going to go into a little pocket right there. You'll see it inside the frame. I don't know if you'll be able to see it here, but there's a little hole right there, right where my finger is. So I'll move out. Do you see that hole? Yeah, you can see it. Yeah. So the spring just sits right inside of it. Pretty ingenious, really, to be honest. And if I can see, there you go. Now, this is where people kind of sometimes get, you know, freaky. They say, well, how does it actually install? A couple things. When we took it out, should have paid attention as to how it goes back in. There's two sides to these slide locks. One is smooth and flat. The other one has a channel. The channel comes back towards you because that's what locks up on the barrel. All right, so let's keep that in mind. Okay, if you put it on backwards, it won't work. So now to put this in, we're going to kind of start it like so. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in, and I'm going to depress the spring, and then try to capture the spring with the leading edge, and then force it over. All right, so sometimes you need a third hand here for this one because you got now I've got it there, and I've got to depress that spring with a punch. I'm going to get a fatter punch, and now this is where you can lose a spring too if you're not careful. We're going to press that punch down, or that spring down, and get it caught. All right. Now I kind of have it caught. I'm going to use my fingers, and I'm going to push it straight across, and I got it. It wasn't that hard, really. But you'll notice it has the spring pressure I need. It's certainly easier now to access. It doesn't stick out over the profile of the gun, and looks better. So, and we know it's flatter. We know it's a little thicker. We know it's more precision. We know it's going to tighten up the gun a little bit. We know it's going to shoot better. So, what can you, this is one of the most inexpensive parts you can do. And I believe it makes a big difference. And it's certainly, every time you try to take the gun apart, it makes a huge difference. Trust me. This is one of the most popular things we've sold. We've been selling forever. Now, let's put the gun back together, and then we'll be done with this little process. So, first things first, going to drop our trigger in, right? Trigger mechanism, came out of the gun like this. I'm just going to keep it like this. And I'm going to drop the trigger shoe kind of in first, just to kind of get it started. And then the trigger housing goes in the back, and now it's all going to settle in there, right? So one of the things I like to do is press down on the cruciform. You usually hear a little click, but there's no click today. All right. And we just make sure that it's in place, all the way seated. I can see my hole through the trigger housing pin. I can see my hole through the trigger pin hole right there. So everything looks good. Looks like they're in the right spot. Next thing we want to do is drop our slide stop right over top of everything. And again, kind of just look in there, and my holes line up. Looks like it's good. It's in the right pocket. Looks like it's good. Take my locking block, actually drop it right over top of both those items. Can press that by hand. Again, going back here now, looking at my pins. Everything looks good. Sometimes you have to push down on the trigger bar to actually get it to line up right. Also, same with the slide stop itself, the actual slide stop. So once you get them all lined up, the first thing I want to do is actually install my trigger housing pin, just to keep that locked in place. So I can push that in a little bit and then grab my little hammer with my little nylon top. Okay, and then I'll just true that up with a punch, just so it's not interfering with my hand. Everything looks good. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, now the trigger pin comes in. Sometimes it gets hung up on the different pieces, so I can take a punch sometimes to get in there and kind of make sure everything's straightened out, then hold it down with my thumb or my finger, which I'm doing right now. And then let's see if this thing will work itself in there by hand. All right, so I've got it set pretty much there, and now I'm going to go ahead and true it up. And sometimes you'll hear a little click, and this is very important, that allows you to know that the slide stop, not the slide lock, but the slide stop, has clicked into place on the notches of the trigger pin. And I heard a little click. I don't know if you heard it or not, but now that looks good. So the only thing I want to do before I put it all back together is just to make sure I've got some spring pressure here, and I do on my slide stop. Spring pressure on my slide lock. I do. Okay. So the coil spring that is involved or intersects and manages the slide lock is not really that difficult, but you have to be careful not to launch it across the room. So I always want to manage it with my thumb and my finger over top of it as I'm manipulating that. You saw that I got it started with a punch, I depressed it, and I captured it on that leading edge. And then once you have it captured, you can slide it right over top, and because of the notch, it's going to actually notch into place, and it's going to allow it to seat itself where it's supposed to be. And then you capture the spring into the frame with the actual slide lock itself. So pretty simple procedure, but man, I tell you what, this makes a huge difference in the ability to take the gun apart and put it back together. Of course, is now just putting the slide back on the rails. Everything seems to be working good. Boom. Slide stop works. Boom, boom. And there it is. That's the installation of the extended precision slide lock in your Gen 5 guns. And it's going to work in also the the G43, 43X, 48, all the MOS guns there as well. So it's anything that uses that coil spring is the same disassembly procedure as I just described here with this Glock 19. All the Gen 5s have this feature. So if you're looking to make it easier to take your gun apart, this is the answer. I'm Lenny McGill. This, of course, is the GlockStore. We've got every Glock piece and part in stock, as well as all the best aftermarket parts to make your Glock better, to make you a better shooter, and to make you a safer shooter. So check out the website, GlockStore.com. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, be part of the action. I'm Lenny McGill. We'll see you next time.